Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Diana Costello. I'm the Executive Director of the Monadnock International Film Festival, and I have with me Dwight Bowie, who is our board chair, and Dan White from Florentine Films. So we would like to start by presenting the Audience Choice Awards. But before we do, I just want to remind everybody that this is only day 2. We have day 3 coming up tomorrow morning at the Keene Cinemas, where we are having a free family film program of 2 animated films, one that starts at 9:45 and another that starts at 11:30, I believe. And then in the afternoon, we have 2 really fun films, Bathtubs Over Broadway, and we have our special guest who is the protagonist of that film, and he actually just came here by train tonight, Steve Young, and he is going to do a Q&A after that film. And then we're showing the film Champions, which was the big blockbuster hit in Spain in 2018. But before we announce the Audience Choice Awards, I do want to once again thank our major sponsors because, you know, we couldn't do this without them and many other people. So I'd like to thank Silver Direct, our production partner, the Putnam Foundation, Consensus Technology, Yankee Publishing, CNS Wholesale Grocers, and the Colonial, and plus our board of directors, all of our volunteers, and finally, all of you, because if you didn't come to this, we wouldn't have a festival. So let's just give us all a big hand. And there's one more group I really want to thank, and some of them have already had to leave the festival. I hope there's still some of them here in the audience. But I'd like to thank all of the filmmakers who are present and all of the people who have worked on those films. So if you are a filmmaker and if you're in the audience, could you please stand so that we can recognize you and thank you for your hard work? So the first award that we're gonna present is the Best Documentary Short Award, voted on by all of you. And the winner of that award is Sister Hearts by director Mohammed, I know I'm going to screw this up, Gorgistani with Even Odd Films. The filmmaker is not here, but we will get in touch with them and let them know that they won this award. And now Dwight is going to present the Best Narrative Short Award.
Good evening. The winner for the Audience Choice Award for Best Narrative Short Film is Uber X by Matthew Brownsdorf. And they aren't here either, so next will be Dan White from Florentine Films, please.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you, Diana. Good evening. How you doing? On behalf of Ken Burns Florentine Films, we're honored to present this award to Who Will Write Our History? Roberta Grossman. The film tells how a secret band of people in the Warsaw Ghetto documented daily life to make sure the truth outlives the Nazis' lies. A very important film for today. Thank you.
So what we're going to do now is screen Grit, the film that won the Jonathan Daniels Award. And after the screening, we're going to have an award presentation to the filmmakers. Both of the filmmakers are here. And then afterwards, Virginia Prescott, who we convinced to come back again because we love her and she loves this festival, and we didn't have to twist her arm that hard. So she is going to do the interview again with our filmmakers. And then after that, I hope you'll all come over the street to our after party. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Joe Bohan. I am on the board of directors of MONIFF, and the first thing I want to do is thank everyone for attending and thank Diana Costello for doing an amazing job for this 3 days. It's really not 3 days, it's 12 months and at least 365 days. She has worked tirelessly, and you wouldn't believe what she has to do to go down and curate the films, figure out how to get everyone involved in terms of getting people to come here, getting the programs done. What you do is amazing, Diana. I just can't say enough about it. Now, I have the honor of handing out the Jonathan Daniels Award. But before I do that, I just want to let you know, I was here last year and gave you a little update about the Jonathan Daniels Center for Social Responsibility. We have now, I'm also on the board of that. And within the last year now, we have signed an agreement with the Cheshire Historical Society. We will have the Jonathan Daniels Center established and starting to be built in the next few months. So hopefully by this time next year, the Jonathan Daniels Center will have a physical presence here in Keene, physically set up, and I hope all of you will be able to attend and join it. Now, I'm supposed to give the awards out to the two recipients for Jonathan Daniels. The first person, and by the way, before I had dinner with them tonight, I am just blown. When Virginia Prescott interviews them, you will not believe the trials and tribulations these two women went through to get this film made. I can't believe, I am so totally impressed and so in awe of what they did to get this documentary completed that this is just such a small token of our appreciation for them doing this film and coming here to the film festival to receive the award. The first person who we are handing the award out to is Cynthia Wade, and I guess Cynthia's coming out here. We were supposed to have a photographer take a picture of the three of us, and there you are. You were just hiding from us, trying to make us nervous and sweat, right? Thank you. Okay, and why didn't you have one of these? Okay. Sure, go ahead, please.
I just want to, before Sasha comes out, I just am so blown away by this, by the festival, by Diana, by this beautiful theater, by this community. The more research that I did on Jonathan Daniels, the the more moved I was because Dion, our main character, was a young woman and is all about human rights and has actually been helping her mother in terms of voter rights in her village. And the parallels are really striking to me. And so this is, this is beautiful and this is really meaningful. So thank you. And thank you. Yeah.
So the second recipient is Sasha Friedlander, who co-directed, produced, edited the film. For years it took them to get this together. And Sasha, why don't you come out? And now that we know where the photographer is, the mystery photographer is ready. He wants us to move over here.
Okay.
And maybe I'll move this over here a little bit. Wait. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So now I have the honor of introducing Virginia Prescott. And if you look at page 45 of your book, it has a whole biography of what she's accomplished over her life. And I asked Virginia if I could read the whole thing. She wanted me to just give a small, brief overview of who she is, what she's accomplished. But first of all, by the way, she used to work for NPR in New Hampshire, as you all know. She has moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, in the last year. And she was kind enough to fly back up here and moderate the conversation with the Jonathan Daniels recipients all the way from Atlanta, Georgia, which is just absolutely terrific, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Now, Virginia is the Grace Award winning host on Second Thought for Georgia Public Broadcasting. Before that, she was host of Word of Mouth, writers on a New England Stage and iTunes Top 10 podcast, Civics 101, 10-Minute Writers. Prior to joining NPR, she was a director on NPR programs On Point and Here and Now, which is one of my favorite things to listen to while I'm driving. Throughout her career, Virginia's worked to build sustainable independent radio in the developing world and has trained journalists in post-conflict zones, Sierra Leone to the Balkans. Introduce Virginia Prescott. Thank you.
Hello and good evening, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back with you. I'm going to start my timer so we can stay on track this evening. So pleased to speak with you. Congratulations, both of you. You're going to be all Phil Donahue with this one, I'm afraid. That's how it's going to work. Well, this story, I'm sure many of you watched it and thought, I had no idea about this. This is a largely unknown story, and I'm curious to how you found out about it. I know that, Sasha, you were a reporter in Indonesia for a long time, but I think the film project, let's start there, and that was something that started with you, Cynthia. How? How did you find out about it?
In 2012, I was directing a commercial in Indonesia, and somebody came up to me and said, you make documentaries. If you want to think about your next documentary, you might want to look at the mud flow. And I had no idea what they were talking about. So I actually extended my trip and for 4 extra days went to the mudflow site with a couple of my key crew members, and we took photographs and did some initial shooting just so maybe I could put together a trailer. Came back to the States and I sat there and I thought, I've only been to Indonesia once. I don't know the language. I know little about the culture. I'm not the right person to make this film. So I kind of sat on it fear and I thought, is there a way to partner with somebody? It's going to take a really long time to raise the money. Was reaching out to people in Indonesia, but it just didn't click. And then at a film festival, saw this really beautiful film shot in East Java called Where Heaven Meets Hell, which was about sulfur miners in East Java. It's this gorgeous film that had very much the style of filmmaking that I resonate with and usually am doing. So I reached out to the filmmaker, Sasha Friedlander, and we Skyped. And I said, would you like to co-direct this with me, 50-50? I think it'll be 2 or 3 years. It ended up being 6. And so our lawyers helped us work out deal memos, but we hadn't even met in person. And the first time we met in person, we were at a film market in New York trying to raise money. And then the second time we were actually in Indonesia. And then it was 5 more years of fundraising.
So Sasha, for you, what did you know about the disaster when you were there in Indonesia?
So I had started going to Indonesia when I was 7. My parents brought me there, and I completely fell in love with the people and the culture. And after undergrad, I moved there for 3 years and worked at a newspaper as a journalist. And it was a year actually after the initial mud flow had erupted, and we were covering the story from afar. And when I left Indonesia, the protests had just started to really build, and I was really impressed by the people, going up against the power of Abu Rizal Bakri, who at the time was the chairman of the Golkar Party, and then went to New York and never heard of the story again until Cynthia contacted me in 2013. And I was eager to get back and learn from the people there and see what was going on, and the rest is history.
Sasha is fully fluent in Bahasa, in the Indonesian language, completely fluent, yeah.
So knowing the language, you wanted to partner somebody who knew about the language and the culture, but also you mentioned Where Heaven Meets Hell, her visual style, and that is something I think is so striking about this film, is how beautiful it is to watch visually. And I know that for you two, this was a really big decision for you, that you sunk a lot of money into getting the right lenses and the right people working as DPs. Tell me about that decision and why.
Well, we talk a lot as documentary filmmakers about the kind of eat your vegetables film, where it's good for you, you should eat those Brussels sprouts, but really you want to go to the movies and have popcorn. And it's sort of that, it can feel punitive sometimes, like sit down and watch this serious documentary. And especially because this is a film that has subtitles, and essentially it's a film of course it's a film about many things, but it's also a film about mud. We talked a lot about, how do we even begin in this media-saturated world where everybody is distracted? How do we get people to sit and focus on a film that is very layered with political story and environmental story, and really at the heart of it, there's all this mud, and they're going to have to read subtitles.
So subtitles in mud, that was your elevator pitch.
Yeah, subtitles in mud, yeah. So we both felt like, and for us, I think, to sustain us as artists, we really felt like, any money that we raise, let's really put it into renting these very specialized vintage prime lenses. Prior to this, most of the time how I'd worked in film is using zoom lenses, which means you may be filming I started as a cinematographer and then moved into being a director, but I shot a lot for other people. So you may move around, you may get a wide shot, you may zoom in and get a close-up. There is a frenetic quality to that sometimes, and it can feel very reactive. And what we decided is, because nothing really changes there except the mud rises very slowly, is to be as proactive as possible and to really, we're going to use a 35 millimeter on this, and we're going to use a 50 on this, and let's do an 85 on this, so that we're really throwing things out of focus in the background and making them crisp in the foreground, and we're pulling on those blues and greens. So each of those lenses, we rented them. We worked with a bunch of cinematographers, most of whom had their own camera. But the lenses are something you put onto the camera. So we carried these rented lenses in a backpack, and each lens cost $25,000. And so we would have this, and we were tromping through the mud and, literal grit. But we did that with 9 extended trips over the course of 6 years. And each trip was about 2 to 3 weeks. But you know how time contracts and expands. Each day was a year, really, truly, because it's really hot and it was complicated. And then we would come back, and Sasha was editing. We went to several edit workshops. But as we were editing, we started to realize what we were missing, and then we would raise more money and go back. So I don't know if you want it, but it's very much in the style of Where Heaven Meets Hell and a couple of the other films that I did, trying to think about showing more than telling when we could.
So how did you do that? How did you bring the discipline of showing, not telling?
Well, for instance, for a while with Cuts, we had voiceover where Dion explains that the mud is rising, right? And she sort of explains it, and she explains the pipes, and she explains the drill, and we worked with 2 animators, and we had to set the scene. But those statues, which I remember very well, Sasha, you said we should film these statues, and I just remember that particular day, like I'd sort of hit a low point, you know, like the jet lag and the heat, it was so hot, and we were filming the making of the statues, which was over the course of a long time. And I thought, why are we filming these statues? I'm so tired. Like, it was just, it didn't seem relevant. And of course, it became very relevant because it allowed us throughout the edit to show how the mud was rising. And now, by the way, the statues are under the mud completely.
That is, they're an unbelievable barometer and so visually effective. What are they holding in their outstretched hands?
What they're holding in their hands is objects that the villagers placed from their homes as a symbol to remind people that they're still here, they're still waiting, and this is what they've lost.
They're like offerings. Well, this is not a journalism movie. This is not this side says this and that side says that. You followed Dion and her mother Harwati for the most part, but there are a lot of other families, as you know, you've all just seen it. You saw that there are a number of different characters. But there are those who work for the Bakri Corporation, for example, and very few others, who say that this was actually caused by the volcano 800 miles away. When did you decide that you're not going to do some people don't believe in climate change, so let's hear from, or whatever, you know what I mean? The kind of idea of honoring the other side.
I think in the beginning we were trying to walk a line, but as we did more research and as we realized, as we spoke to more international scientists, Sasha lives in the Bay Area in Berkeley, and one of the leading scientists that knows, who is really an expert on this, she would meet with them often, and we were in contact with a lot of people. It really became evident that those who say it was because of the earthquake really are financed by the Bakri Group, and that we needed to put a stake in the ground, that this film has a point of view. We actually filmed 3 families quite democratically over the course of 5 years, so Dion's family and 2 others, and it was enormously painful through the edit labs that we did at Sundance. We actually were invited to do an edit lab in Copenhagen, and a funder paid for that, and we could work with this master editor, that they said that the film really begins to lift off with all this heavy lifting of talking about politics and environment when Dion speaks, and as we see Dion grow up. And, it's hard sometimes when you're working on something for years to see it, and you don't know what the film wants to be, and the film is trying to tell you what it wants to be, and you can't quite see it. And as we cut other stories away and other characters away, and we were able to let Dion tell the story, that's when it began to have a little bit of a lift. And that was Dion's perspective and the villagers' perspective. It's also what we personally believed. So we put a stake in the ground. We did edit the entire film without the Bakri interview, and that was crazy, getting that interview. It took us 4 years, and then we were just about ready to go to launch it at a film festival. We'd locked the film, we were ready to go, and then after 4 years of chasing, thinking we'd never get him, we got this crazy opportunity to interview him, which was a crazy day. So when we did get it, it meant we went back and ripped up the entire film and re-edited it for another 8 months after that. So it was another year before we released it after that.
How did you make decisions about when to go? This is 6 years, there are 9 times. We saw so many different events there. What did you decide, we have to get that, we have to shoot that?
So I think this is one of the hardest things about documentary filmmaking, especially when you've got limited funds. We agonized over many points because, at one point we had $3,000 from the Left Foundation based out of Boston. And we didn't have anything, we had a lot of grant proposals pending, but we weren't sure what we were going to get, if we were going to get anything. And Sasha was aware, for instance, that Bakri was going to go to this Congress. It was when were all wearing their yellow jackets. And she said, you know, maybe we could send a crew and we could get a doorstop interview. Maybe they could interview him. And that was her idea. But here's the thing, you could use that $3,000, you could send a crew from Jakarta, and there was a cameraman we worked with when we couldn't get there. He went several times, and he also worked with Sasha there. And they could hang out, they could camp out for 3 days in front of this Congress, and we could pay them, pay all of their expenses, and maybe walk away with nothing. And then there goes that whole grant. Do you spend it? Do you not? But in fact, that was when he says boring. So it was very worthwhile to do that. Another time was rain. We had lightning, we had light rain, but often when the heavy rains would come, we would get up at 3 or 4 in the morning when it was dark. We would film because there's a very small window when the light is pretty, because it's right on the equator. So there isn't really a sunrise and sunset. It's like somebody flips a switch on and then off. And it's this very bright light that's hard to shoot in during the day. So in the middle of the day, because our crew would be just exhausted, we would let them go back, eat, and take a nap, and then we would shoot into the night. So then the heavy rain would come, you know, and it's like we'd look at each other, but we can't do that to the camera person. Like, he's got to take a nap because we've been going around the clock. So at one point, we sent a Jakarta crew out simply to hang out with Dion so we could get heavy rain. And we just knew she needed to wear her purple scarf because in like sort of the lighter rain shots, she was wearing a purple scarf. So sometimes we had to knit it together. We didn't ask anybody to do anything that they wouldn't have done, but doing this over kind of like a quilt piecemeal, we had to, and because Sasha was shooting it, we would see where we were missing points.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, especially with right after the election when it's so tense when they're waiting for the results of the election, and she was wearing that beautiful bright red scarf. If you did direct in any way, direct people to do certain things.
I mean, there were certain things that would happen, like the conversation where Harwati's talking to Dion about the communist purge, and we would be like at a rally in the middle of the streets with motorbikes zooming by, and we'd hear them starting to have this conversation. We're like, wait, just hold that thought, and let's go back to the house later tonight and have that conversation when it's quiet and when we can really capture the moment. So little things like that. Or Dion told me that she really wanted to become a lawyer and that she was thinking of asking her mom to help her with her application for school. And I was like, please just wait till we get to Indonesia. We'll film you telling her and it'll be amazing. Please just wait. And so she held that until we got there.
That was such a sweet scene. But do you think it's also because you two are women? I mean, obviously you might have made other choices if you might have followed other families, but you really glommed onto these two. Is it because they were a mother and daughter? Is that part of the appeal for you? Yes. Yeah. How did that?
I have 2 daughters, and increasingly I was watching Harwati instill a sense of justice and history and context in her daughters in the way that I was trying to do with mine on the other side of the globe. And so increasingly I felt very connected to Harwati. And Sasha, I think, because she speaks Bahasa, you became very, very close. I mean, you were sort of half big sister, half mother figure to Dion, and very close. And I think that because we were women, we focused on the mother-daughter. We also wanted to be able to tell a story that was unexpected in a Muslim, it's the largest Muslim population in the world, but it's a very pluralistic society. It's a vast country, and it's got lots of contradictions. And I was personally, I think we both were tired of seeing that sort of knee-jerk mainstream media portrayal of what Muslim is. And, you know, Harwati wears her baseball cap, and she's figured out how to make a living after her husband died, and she's instilling this sense of fierce justice in her daughter. And Dion found her voice over the course of those years. So that was exciting to us to focus on that story and tell the story. And quite frankly, we've talked about this. I don't think we would have gotten the interview with Bakri had we not been women, and particularly American women, honestly. Like, I don't think Indonesians would have gotten it, and I actually don't think male directors would have gotten it. It was confusing and interesting to them that these women were, so I think that was part of it. And we did have somebody come to the hotel, and we got hair and makeup done, and we got fake eyelash. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but we got fake eyelashes on that to go on the tennis court that day. And at the end, he was like, I want a picture with the ladies. And so we have this picture with Bakri at the end of it. So.
What was it like during that conversation with him? I'm just wondering, like, how did you not register?
It was really intense. I mean, I had about an hour to prep myself. I sat back as he was playing tennis, and I kind of just got into the zone. And yeah, I just had to keep him engaged for 70 minutes. And because at any moment I could ask a question and he could be like, okay, I'm done. He didn't need to stay. And he actually, before the interview, had told his PR person that he did not want to address we only actually had 3 questions in our list of about 25 that were directly related to the mud flow. And he said, those ones I will not answer those questions. I'll answer all the others, but I won't answer those. And it was within, 25 minutes, he just brought it up on his own. Somehow, like, I was able to get a rapport going with him in the early stages of it, where he was able to open up.
So what is the official position now? I mean, obviously we saw that the then vice president, and there has been actually just a couple weeks ago a new election in Indonesia. Joko won again, but he has a new vice president who I think is like a hardline Islamist. Have I got that one right? Yeah, that's what I thought. So not the same vice president, but are they drilling?
So in this past August, they renewed a 20-year contract to continue drilling in Sidoarjo. So it was a huge setback.
Have you been to a screening yet where people hear that line or read that line and you don't hear groans in the audience? It's really something. And I think that one of the things is, it's funny, it's the second time I've seen this film now, and I saw a lot more hope in it this time, I think, in some way. You know, these little infusions of, like the teacher talking about, this has made me stronger, this defiance has made me stronger, and other little pieces that I found to be hopeful. But obviously, Joko was running very much on the I'm the Obama candidate, with the imagery and everything. Has he proved to be the hope and change one of us candidate?
It's so complicated. I mean, you should talk about he got a lot of criticism recently. It's so complicated, and so one thing that's an aside is Dion, who is now in her second year in college focusing on law. She was nominated and then won an Amnesty International award, and she'd never been outside of Indonesia, and she flew about 2 or 3 weeks ago, she flew to The Hague. We met her there, and she got this award, and Amnesty International, it was a whole week of training and being fortified and being connected with other activists from around the world, and the Amnesty International office in Amsterdam has Indonesian specialists, so they were really working with her so that she can keep herself safe and she can keep doing her work, and they're going to help organize underground screenings throughout Indonesia now, because it's not, Bakri owns 4 of the 5 television stations, so it's not going to be on television, and there's no Vimeo, things are blocked often there. So, so that's all great. I was connecting this to, but we were talking about the election, and it's again, she was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to vote for Jokowi because of the drilling, and then she was with her Indonesian translator, and he was like, yeah, but the alternative is Prabowo, because it was still Jokowi versus Prabowo this past election, and it's just like, we know that story, right? We know that story here. So that it's complicated, because some people are like, it's the lesser of two evils. Other people are upset. Some people are just happy they got the money and that's enough, and that's good. Check, we got the money. Other people are seeing the larger implication. Yeah.
I mean, I think the money in the end for people like Harwati who saw the bigger picture and like Dion, it wasn't really anything. It was insulting in a lot of ways. And the fact that the government still hasn't done anything to come in and help repair the economy there and to focus on the health issues and to do research on the implications of the mud in that community, I think is still something that they're very upset about and are continuing to fight, even though up until this point, they haven't been heard.
Yeah. Anyone from the audience have questions? I think we have Mike set up. Hi. Yeah.
I was just wondering what it was like for you as filmmakers, how the process of a story, the beginning, middle, and end of a story unfolded for you, given how long the process, the great distances, and the unpredictability of it.
Did everybody hear that okay? He's asking about the process of, because they spent so long on this, coming up with a beginning, middle, and an end. What was that process like for you?
Well, I think we both thought it would take half the time that it did take. And I mean, we were so naive in a way because we were like, well, after the election. And then we would say, well, after this, well, after that, well, after the 9th anniversary. Like it just, and it was hard. And for a while, I said to Sasha, why don't we just make this a short film? Let's just make it a short film. And Sasha said, no, let's keep going on it. Let's just see where it takes us. She was, at one point, you were way more patient than I was, because I was, and then when we got the MacArthur grant, we got a MacArthur grant for this film, then we had to make it a feature length. MacArthur was not going to fund a short film. So then we were bound to that. I think it was really hard to know where we were going to end up. And earlier cuts had these 3 families. We were weaving 3, which was way too many people, but we were weaving these 3 family stories, braiding them. And then we had, in my office, we would have these, we live on different coasts. I'm East Coast, she's West Coast, but we would meet intensely and have these these sort of edit camps. We strung string across across my office, and we had clothespins, and we had 3x5 cards, and so each, like, Bakri had his own 3x5 card color, and then, like, sort of a interstitial moment of something that was just, like, more maybe colorful and less verbal would have a different color, and Dion had a color, and actually all of our other characters that aren't necessarily in the film had their own color, and we would, like, organize them for months, and then we would try the edit that way, and then it wouldn't quite work, or we'd see where it would sag, and then we would rip it up and organize it, and then you squint your eyes, like squinting on the lights on a Christmas tree, like, is it even? It's like, do we see Dion enough through it? So that's how we did it, and in a lot of these edit labs as well. It was the hardest film, I think, production-wise, that certainly I've ever worked on. And we had a lot of supervising or consulting editors, but all of it, Sasha lived with it. Like she just kept, and she knew it intimately because she was there and also knows the language. In the end, she was really the only one who could edit it.
Was there ever any question of, you talked about after the Bakri interview, you just had to tear up the whole film and redo it. Was there ever a sort of like, well, this is a different, maybe we, was there any discussion of whether or not that had to happen?
That was a discussion before we flew to Jakarta.
Yeah.
Once we flew to Jakarta and got the interview, we were committed. Mm-hmm. And the interview, as soon as we were done and I was recapping the whole thing to Cynthia, I knew we had some amazing sound bites in there. And a lot of them aren't even in the film, but we got a lot in the interview, and it was important to show that perspective.
What did it mean you had to do to change the film? What did you bring up more or have to lose?
Golkar.
Golkar.
The politics.
Oh, the politics.
Yeah, it
I see.
became
The
much
party.
more political, and we had, in order to do that, because Western people aren't as familiar with the history and politics in Indonesia, we had to do some explaining and backstory, which
And the
hadn't
truth is,
been.
I really, there's a point between minute 30 and 40 where we start to get into the Golkar, and we start to get into the Suharto and the dictatorship, where we've done some things and we've put some music and some other things, but it's just, we needed to do that heavy lifting in order to pay off the end when Jacoby, the president, is with Bakri and they're sitting together and then the drilling happens. But every time that 30 to 40 minute mark comes by, it's so hard. And it's true in fiction films, it's true in novels. Like, you're ramping up in Act 1, you're ramping up, and then there's this sag in Act 2, but you have to do that heavy lifting in order to then sort of, once we get to the election, it's easier, but we really struggled with those 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's around the time where there's the cockfight and the kind of local scenes. Yeah. I'm sure there are some other questions. We do have a microphone?
I guess two questions. One was, how many hours of footage did you shoot? And how large is the anti-drilling sentiment in Indonesia, where it's a major part of their economy? They were looking at a 225 end of gas, and now they just discovered another 2 trillion cubic feet of gas in South Sumatra. So is there a strong anti-drilling sentiment?
In terms of hours of footage, I don't know. We have, I think it's almost 48 terabytes of footage, which is a lot. We were shooting in 4K, so it's very, very large files. We have a lot of footage.
And when this is an aside, not about drilling, but they were like babies. Like, we had double drives, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and we would sync up, and then she would upload a cut, and then I could like pull it down and look at it and try some things. But when we went to the edit labs, I mean, documentary filmmakers fly economy. But when we went to the edit labs, we actually bought business class tickets, because otherwise they're going to make you check your bag. And we had these giant drives that were like our children, our baby. We had to take them on, and we needed priority to put them up above us when we would go to these edit labs. That's just, that, I don't know. It was just like the responsibility of that footage was really, we had backup, but still. But anyway, the drilling.
Yeah, the drilling. I think at the moment in Indonesia, there isn't a whole lot of anti-mining sentiment, in large part because the story like of Lapindo, it was really censored within Indonesia. And even when we showed the film, Dion went to a screening in Yogyakarta not that long ago, and she said the audience was shocked to see the story from that perspective, because everything that they had seen on the news prior was a completely different message. And her mom is actually leading East Java chapter of the anti-mining network, and there is a movement starting to build, but I think it's people like Harwati and Dion who are going to have to really build that up and spread it across the country.
Other questions? One here?
I was just wondering what the villages looked like before the mud flow, and you said 16 people died. What happened to the rest of the villages? Where did they go, and how long did it take? I mean, I could just imagine, like, did the mud flow happen and people were buried? Was it a slow progression and they moved people out? Like, what happened?
So the 16 people dying were right at the drilling site. There were subsequent deaths of strange cancers that have never been studied, and a spike in asthma that nobody has studied. And at one point, we actually filmed, this is an aside, but we filmed Dion taking her younger sister to the doctor because she was wheezing and coughing, and the doctor just said, well, if she stops eating crackers, she'll be just fine. And for a while, we had that in the film. We took it out. You should add.
I've seen figures, a real range of figures, like 39,000 displaced to 60,000 displaced.
60,000,
Yeah, it's definitely 60,000 or more, for sure. And what happened was there was a relocation camp right at the time of the initial mud flow, and then people started moving in with family members who lived outside of the devastated area, or getting loans and trying to rebuild. Like Harwati built a home with her mother and her sister and her brother, and they all took little loans and built what they could and all moved into a house together. And were waiting, hoping that they would finally get their remaining compensation. Little did they know it would take 10 years plus. So most of the people, they didn't want to leave the area because this was all that they knew. So they just moved a little bit outside. And what's really scary is that what scientists are saying now is that because all of this mud is coming up out of the earth and there's sort of now becoming this empty space below, they're afraid that everything is going to drop. And that could be even much more catastrophic than the initial mud flow explosion and could really destroy the surrounding area as well.
So when it actually did happen, however, it wasn't like Vesuvius blowing and covering everything. It was like some explosions and says pellets.
You see the
right,
the
right,
fire
what it
and
looks
the explosion.
like. Right.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering.
But-
I think is your question about
But it
like
was
why
a
weren't more people
slow
killed?
sink.
kind
Right.
of?
So the people killed were the 16 people were on the drilling
Right.
at the drilling site.
The farmers in the area.
Farmers in the area as well. Yes. And it was enormous. The initial explosion. But then in terms of it creeping out and continuing and ultimately sinking 16 villages, people could get out and grab the few things that they could.
Some could.
Yeah, some could.
And
Yeah.
then they were building the levees up because
Right, over and over
over
again.
and over and over again, and it was just going higher and higher. And they would actually pick locations and say, like, this is the new zone, and we're going to build a levee here. And the people in those areas where their homes were, like, they knew that they were going to be gone within days.
I was trying to get a sense of like how far the little village where Dion and her mother and sister live now is from the mud pit.
3 miles.
3 miles. Yeah.
And if you go to Google Earth, I mean, if you type it in, you can see it.
Yeah.
It's enormous. Yeah.
Another interesting little note, you know, if you look up La Pindo mine explosion, now it's like mud tourism. That's what comes up.
It's 3 stars on TripAdvisor. Truly.
Right here. There's someone over on this side.
Actually, my question had to do with that. What kind of campaign is happening that allows Indonesians to view this as a tourist attraction rather than a catastrophe? Because there was a lot of shots of people going and treating it like a selfie shot.
I mean, I'm a New Yorker. I don't live there right now, but most of my life did. And I had a 1-year-old child who I was separated from for about 48 hours on September 11th, 2001. And my husband was trying to find a bridge to walk over. I mean, it was a mess. And I felt so angry for years when tourists would come in and snap selfies down at the World Trade Center site. Like, I couldn't go down there, I couldn't look at it, I just couldn't. So in some ways, it's not dissimilar to that. There's a big split between upscale or more moneyed urban Indonesians coming from cities and getting off tour buses, and then the villagers. Like, there's just this, I mean, the urban Indonesians live a very different life than Dion's village and neighbors. So I think that's part of it. You know, that was my experience, and of course, people feel like they have a part of it. People feel like they want to capture some of it. They want to feel like they were there. They are connected, but it was like I couldn't deal with it.
It's also located just 20 minutes from the second largest city in Indonesia, Surabaya, and one of the main highways that runs across all of Java passes right by the levees. And so they're standing out there with, you know, their flags and their whistles, and they're waving people down, beckoning them to come in. And so that's what I think ends up happening. Yeah, for many. So people passing through just stop along the way.
This is a larger conversation about disaster tourism or poverty tourism. You know, you can go to Mexico City or India and you can tour the dumps. And, you know, some people say that that is a horrible thing to do. Others have said, well, tourists who are moved by this start education programs or hunger programs or medical facilities. So I think it's a larger conversation going on now in the world, too. I see a hand here in the middle aisle.
Hi there. I was just wondering, for Dion and her mom and whoever speaks out, how dangerous is it for them?
One of the things that I think we felt really good about when she was at The Hague is, I think it was, you would agree with this, right? It was more dangerous for her prior to Amnesty International getting involved. Like when she was in that sort of like the film was coming out, she was going off to college and, you know, joining student activist groups, like it is dangerous. But the way in which Amnesty and their network and their experts were working with her, meeting with her, connecting her with people, training her, I felt a lot better about that. And they were saying that she's now in less danger, in part because she is becoming more visible and there's an international community around her. She is, though, there is danger.
Yeah. Any other questions? She knows that. Back here.
Well, we'll have to make this the last question.
This has to do with the film more than political. There was a scene where she was swimming in the pool with her dress and her hairdress flowing. What was
her burkini?
Her what?
Isn't that called a burkini?
Burkini, yeah.
What, you know, being the people that shot it, what were you trying to do? What were you trying to prove or show there?
Okay.
That was interesting.
It's a great question. So we actually shot her taking her sister swimming, and which didn't end up in the film, a different time. And Sasha told me they went to sort of like it wasn't really a water park like we know water parks, and Sasha was explaining how she dressed for that. And my hope personally was that we were going to get Bakri not only playing tennis but swimming, because he loves to swim. And one of the thoughts that I had was, if we can get him swimming at the beginning of the film, but Dion swimming at the end, which never worked, because Bakri wouldn't swim for us. That was something, but it was more like she's been living in these muddy, muddy waters for her whole life, and she finally can go off to university. There's a clear-eyed clarity to her, and she can finally go off and begin to define her own life. But the mud continues, and the explosions continues, and that sort of cutting those two shots together, and we shot that on a GoPro, in a case. The clean, chlorinated water against the muddy explosion. It's like she has a path. She wants to be a human rights lawyer. She knows where she's going. It's clear-eyed, and yet this continues and it remains. And so it was the tension of that. That's why we did it.
Yeah, I think we know what kind of lawyer she's going to choose to be. Thank you so much to Cynthia Wade and Sasha Friedlander, and thank you for being here.
Wait, we should say something about Dion. Oh, thank you. We've been, Dion is set for university now, but there are all of these training programs. She can meet with students, going to other cities, really widening her world, meeting with people where she doesn't have money. So the director of the festival, Diana Costello, has very graciously allowed us, Diana will be holding a donations bucket in the back. And I can't even tell you, $1, $2 goes so far for Dion's education. We immediately put it into a bank account that's for her scholarship. So if you've got a couple of dollars and you can throw it in there, it will go to Dion. So thank you for that, and thanks to the festival for that.
So, thank you. That was just incredible. I just could sense the enthusiasm and love that you have for that film, for this film. It's just incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I'm amazed that you put 9 years of sweat and tears into this without making any money in it. I mean, they were working they were not making any money, salary, while they were doing this. It was just truly incredible, absolutely incredible. So thank you again for the panel. Thank you for doing everything you've done. I had the good fortune of being able to give the awards out to Cynthia and Sasha, but now we historically have a tradition where we hand out to Diana and Virginia flowers. Now, you have to understand, I'm not a big flower guy unless I go food shopping and I buy flowers for my wife. And the only time, when I was courting my wife, I actually didn't bring her flowers like the other suitors were doing. I brought her chocolate milkshakes. So if it was actually up to me, I would be handing you a chocolate milkshake, Virginia. But Dwight, I'm handing you, but in tradition, we're handing you flowers. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you. And I can't sing like Burke Park, so I'm just going to be quiet. And Diana, is she coming up? Thank you so much. Diana, I said 365 days a year for this. Thousands upon thousands of hours for this festival, and we so sincerely appreciate everything you do. And your determination and your passion for this is just acknowledged by the community, the board, and everyone in this room. Thank you. And now we are going to fireworks for the after festival party.